Hey everyone. Today let's talk about a topic that sounds huge, but is actually tied to every single one of us. How do humans actually come to know the world? Think about it. A big part of how we understand reality comes from school, family, society. Basically, other people tell us things and we start by believing them. Other people explain how the world works, and we kind of just run with that explanation first. But here's the question. Besides the kind of understanding we get from being taught, do we have any other ways to know the world? And if you push it one step further, there are so many peoples and cultures on this planet. Do they all see and understand the world in the same way? From the past to the present to the future, will humanity's picture of the world stay the same? If not, then in the future, could the world as we see it be completely different from what it is today? Yeah? Every one of those questions is big enough that you can toss out just one of them and people go quiet for 3 seconds, then take a sip of water. So let me be blunt up front, one episode can't possibly explain all of this clearly. And honestly, that's exactly why we made this channel, to talk through it slowly, patiently, and in a way people can actually follow. Also, we're not just here to introduce what other people think. If we get the chance, we want to try something a little bolder using thought experiments plus philosophy and science to build our own framework for explaining the world. Like, you know those mysteries that look super scientific but somehow still feel kind of mystical? Why is the speed of light constant? How does gravity work at a distance? What's the underlying physical mechanism of relativity? Where does mass come from? Does dark matter even exist? Obviously, we're not going to solve any of that in 1 or 2 sentences. But we can do one thing in a new way of thinking, lay the problems out again and see if the logic runs smoother. And I'll be honest, we have limits. We're not the ones who can verify this stuff. And verification shouldn't rely on someone who makes videos anyway. So what can we do? At most, we can explain the ideas clearly, lay out the full chain of reasoning, and make it understandable, so other people can critique it, poke holes in it, or even take it and test it. There's an old Chinese saying, even in a town of just 10 households, you'll find people who are honest and trustworthy. I believe the same thing here. If what we're saying really makes sense, someone out there will be willing to verify it personally. And even if it turns out we're wrong, that's fine. Being clearly wrong is more valuable than being vaguely right. Alright, next I'll lay down a few simple house rules for this channel. First, we'll do our absolute best to make things clear, easy to follow, and actually fun to listen to. We'll try to tell more stories and do less of that paper style info dump. But I need to give you a heads up. What we're talking about is deep stuff. Deep, not obscure. Obscure is best left to the real philosophers, mathematicians and physicists to chew on. What we can do is take questions that aren't exactly everyday and explain them in everyday language. Second, this is a slow-paced channel. It's not going to be like short-form videos where there's a dopamine hit every 3 seconds and a plot twist every 5. You'll need a bit of patience. Honestly, if you came here thinking, I'll just scroll and relax, you might quickly realize, wait, why do I have to use my brain? And then you'll probably leave. That's fine. We're not here to stop you. This channel is more like it's for people who are willing to take their thinking one step deeper. Third, there's going to be some build up the beginning. That part is unavoidable, because studying deep things isn't always the hard part. The hard part is how to explain something deep without making it feel obscure. That takes a ton of mental effort, seriously. If you just want me to state a conclusion, I can do it in 3 sentences. But if you want me to explain the why, and have you finished thinking, oh, I get it now, that's the difficult part. So we'll probably spend the first 3 to 5 episodes setting things up. Depends on how it goes, basically getting enough background in place so we can really talk later. Otherwise, I'll be right at the key point, and you'll already be in the comments like, can you just tell us the conclusion? And then I'm just sitting there like, yeah, that's awkward. Alright? Time to get to the main point. Our channel is about how humans come to know the world, and that's naturally cross-disciplinary history, philosophy, science. Art, none of them get to sit this one out. So you can imagine the face YouTube's algorithm makes when it runs into a channel like mine. It probably stares at me, frowns, and goes, so what lane are you in exactly? History, tech, philosophy. Or, wait, are you here to wreck the place? So from the start, I kind of expected the algorithm to get me? Because it has no idea who to recommend me to. But my reason for doing this is actually pretty simple. I feel like I've got some ideas in my head. And even if they end up barely making a ripple, even if people laugh at me for saying them, I still want to put them out there because I honestly think it's my mission as a normal human being. Yeah, it sounds a little cringe, a little main character energy, but I'll own it. So where do we even start with knowing the world? I'm choosing something super everyday, but also super foundational language. You might be thinking, language is just talking? Just communication, right? But if you treat it as a more serious question, you'll realize language isn't only a tool. It's more like a system running inside our brains, almost like a kind of programming language. Be clear, we're not doing a linguistics class here, and we're definitely not here to show off. We're just using language as an entry point to look a bit deeper. How does human thinking actually take shape? How do we build a world model inside our heads? A lot of people think they're seeing the world. But what we're really seeing is the world after the brain has processed it. And language. Language is like the most critical instruction set inside that processor. Let me tell a really simple story. When a little kid learns the word cat for the first time, what actually just happened? Before they learn it, what does the world look like to them? It's this continuous stream of sensations, soft, moving, meowing, scratching, rubbing up against you, basically a whole lump of experience mud. But when an adult points at a cat and says, cat, and then keeps pointing at different cats, black ones, white ones, fat ones, skinny ones, the kid's brain suddenly does something kind of amazing. It slices that continuous mess of feelings into separate chunks. They form an abstract category, K8, and that moment is huge. Because from then on, they don't have to relearn that soft-moving thing from scratch every single time. They just call up one word, cat. And boom, a ton of experience gets compressed into a reusable concept. See what's happening here? Compressing, calling, combining, reasoning. Doesn't that sound a lot like an algorithm? Our brains are basically building data structures, and language is the interface to those data structures. So when I say language is like a programming language, I'm not trying to sound cool. I mean it literally. It's running in your head. It tells you what counts as an object, what counts as a relationship, what kinds of things are easy to put into words, and what kinds of things you'll probably just gloss over. And that also explains something really interesting, people who speak different languages often organize the world a little differently. Some languages like to spell time out super clearly. Past, present, future, neatly separated. Some people are insanely sensitive to direction. North, south, east, west. Like they've got a built-in radar. And some languages have a habit of marking where your information comes from. Like, I saw it with my own eyes. I heard it from someone. I'm guessing. So the language basically forces you to take responsibility for how reliable your knowledge is. I'm not saying one language is more advanced. Okay? Not that. What I'm saying is language is like a pair of glasses. Wear it long enough and it becomes your default viewpoint. It doesn't decide whether you can see the world, but it does affect what you're more likely to notice and how you naturally organize your experience. The longer you walk a certain path, the more it turns into your thinking muscles. Now, if we talk about the hardware side of language for a second, just lightly touch it. Human speech usually builds syllables out of consonants and vowels. You can think of consonants as the skeleton and vowels as the flesh. Put them together and the whole thing can move. But the world gets even more interesting. Some languages have extra parameters, like tone. Chinese is a classic example, and some dialects go even further. Connected speech tone changes can get so complex that, to outsiders, it sounds like a melody all smeared together. You can't even tell where one word ends and the next begins. But locals won't mess it up, and they won't misunderstand each other either. Linguistics has terms that sound scary, like the kind you mentioned. An irregular continuous tone, Sandy system. But irregular doesn't mean it has no pattern. It just means we outsiders haven't found the pattern yet. For native speakers, it's natural. It's stable. It just works. So what does that tell us? It tells us the human brain can handle ridiculously complex rule systems almost unconsciously. We use language so automatically that we forget how insane it really is. Language isn't just for communication. It's more like a high compression protocol that's been running in human groups for a very long time. Writing is just external storage for language. Language itself is the living algorithm. All right, so let's use the metaphor you brought up to make this even more intuitive. Treat language like a programming language. If your thinking language were like C, what kind of world would you build? What's the vibe of C? It's close to the machine, kind of hard and super free. You decide how memory is used, where pointers point, how structures are built. It's freedom, for sure, but it's also dangerous. One wild pointer and the whole world just collapses. So if we use C as a metaphor for a way of understanding reality, it's like a mechanical world made of gears, screws, and a metal skeleton. You can control things precisely, but you also have to take responsibility for every tiny detail. You want it fast. Sure, you want it stable. Then you pay for it. That's basically C++ in a nutshell, foundational and powerful, but it doesn't catch you when you fall. Freedom comes with responsibility. Details come with risk. The stronger you are, the easier it is to write yourself straight into a bug. Yeah, that metaphor stings a bit, but it fits. Now, what if your thinking language were like Java? Java feels more like a city with strict building codes. It cares about objects, interfaces, types, safety, standardization, cross-platform rules. When you write, it's like constructing a building, how modules connect, where boundaries are, who's allowed to access what. There are rules. So the world it builds looks like an organized social system. Objects have identities, methods have permissions, interfaces have protocols. The upside is stability, maintainability, teamwork. The downside is sometimes it gets wordy. layers on layers of abstraction, like nesting dolls. If you want to touch the bottom layer, you've got to unwrap a lot of packaging. And Python? What's Python like? It's like a lab. Fast, flexible, readable, perfect for experiments. In your head, you can prototype something quickly, get it running first, then refine it. You try, you fail, you iterate. New ideas pop up like bubbles. It may not be the toughest, but it's amazing for exploration. So if your thinking language is like Python, the world you build is probably one where you can iterate fast, recombine fast, rewrite fast, get an answer working, then improve it over time. And notice this metaphor isn't about which language is better. It's about how different languages shape the way you model things. Natural human language works the same way. Then someone's going to ask, so what about Chinese and English? Who's more advanced? I'd say we shouldn't use a crude ruler like advanced vs backward. Language doesn't determine how civilized a society is. But certain structural traits of a language can, in specific historical moments, affect things like large-scale collaboration, terminology standardization, and how efficiently knowledge spreads. Modern science and engineering rely heavily on concepts being reusable worldwide, expression being as unambiguous as possible, and textbooks, papers, standards, code, protocols being highly standardized. English became a kind of global interface, mostly due to history plus convenience. Industrial expansion, modern universities, international journals, plus the fact that it's pretty handy for assembling technical terms. Chinese has its own strengths, high compression, strong imagery, flexible semantics, a huge poetic space. But in an engineering context, that semantic flexibility can sometimes raise interpretation costs. Add the writing system, the sound system, and cross-dialect differences, and large-scale unified dissemination tends to rely more on strong education and strong organization. So here's the framing I preferred. Chinese isn't inferior, it's powerful. It's just that global collaboration in the modern industrial science engineering system, on some levels, happens to prefer a different kind of standardized interface. That's sharp, but it's also less likely to go off the rails. And honestly, this whole thing is a massive topic, but we're not a pure language channel. Alright, to end this episode, here's a question. If civilization is going to make another big leap, what kind of language would it need? Subscribe and we'll talk about that in the next one.